if I were young again, careless and gay? What if I were young again, just for today? The hot sun in glory setting, with gold thread the vine leaves splitting. Ah, well I know, if my heart were still young, where my thoughts would be now. When the long day's work was done, night coming fast, on the tired world would fall silence at last. The birds in the warm nest sleeping, the stars one by one forth peeping.
Just finishing today's entry in my diary. I got married. Anne Walker and I took the sacrament before God in the Holy Trinity Church of York, and thereby wed. It's the greatest moment of my life. I hope it is for her as well, and I pray that our union will be happy. The service took a mere 40 minutes, but the journey getting here took a hell of a lot longer. I've written about it in the 24 volumes, 7,600 pages of my diary. You won't be able to read the juicy parts, however, as I've written them in a secret code. It isn't easy being a woman in these times. Never mind being a lover of women. Men are hanged for such proclivities, but we women, we're more easily able to get away with such things. You see, no one suspects women of having sexual feelings or longings. It's quite common for women, even married women, to spend weeks with each other. It's referred to as a romantic friendship. Sex is never suspected, even though women often sleep in the same bed. Little do they know. They think our minds are on needlepoint, dresses and bonnets, pining daily for a proposal of marriage from a wealthy suitor. Well, it is for some, but not this woman. Yes, it's true. I do bring a bit of attention to myself, given my unconventional costume. I dress as I please, which admittedly is more like a man, but it is what suits me and comforts me. It suits my nature to dress like this. Indeed, people stare and jeer at me all the time. Men especially make indecorous remarks about whether or not my cock can stand. I just dismiss them as common and vulgar. But truth be told, it does hurt. I think of myself as neither man nor woman, but more as a connecting link. I have great faith in my God, who made me special in this way, and it is my duty to live my true self and to love myself as such. I would probably have been stoned to death if I wasn't a landowner. I inherited my uncle's estate when my brothers died. Had they lived, I would have been doomed to a life of domestic dreariness. It has been my great fortune to inherit Shibden Hall. It gives me the opportunity to exercise my gifts of intellect, competence, and skill as a woman and as a landowner. It's not always easy. I'm challenged often and face plenty of backlash from the men who are not accustomed to taking orders from a woman. Many have tested my fortitude, trespassing on my land to hunt and steal my chickens. But once they find out that I am an excellent markswoman, they stand down. Back to the journey. Although there were many women to be found, it was not always easy finding a lover. I dare say most women found me charming and interesting, and of course they loved the attentions I paid upon them. But it was always a bit tenuous for me when the time came to express my desires. Not only did I risk rejection, I risked exposure and humiliation should my advances be unwanted. Those weren't the only risks either. Contrary to the rumors that I've bedded hundreds of women, I've only had 10 sexual partners, besides my beloved Anne. 2 of those were serious loves, Mariana and Vera. They both broke my heart because they ended our relationship when they each had a proposal of marriage from a wealthy male suitor. So much for trust and loyalty. As always, I healed my heart by reading books of every kind and planning my next travel adventure. I became fascinated with the writings of Marie Curie, and in 1819 I journeyed to Paris to attend her lectures and study medicine. I developed a fascination with dissection and became quite good at it. I befriended a medical student who'd bring me body parts to practice on. I dare say I was better at dissection than the surgeon I'd observed. But again, as a woman, I would never be able to attend university or practice medicine. It was back to Shibden Hall. Seeing my heartache after Vera, my beloved Aunt Anne suggested I meet Anne Walker, who was also a landowner, and a wealthy one at that. She thought Miss Walker could use a friend. She was shy and alone, had recently lost both parents, and was surrounded only by elderly relatives. I was not interested at all. But, as fate would have it, 2 months later, Miss Walker paid a visit to Shibden Hall with her aunt and uncle. To my surprise, I found Miss Walker delightful, and I admit her admiration of me lifted my spirits. I paid a visit to Miss Walker the following week, and frequently thereafter. We got along so easily. She confided in me of her bouts of anxiety and depression, and her difficulty in speaking her mind. I could see she was vulnerable, and I soon became protective of her. I decided to help manage her estate and business matters. Anne never had a critical word from me, nor was she bothered by my manner or dress. I found myself becoming very fond of her, and she admitted the same of me. So physically close we were, at one point we decided to take a kiss, and then another. Our passion was equal. I soon proposed to Anne that we exchange rings and take the sacrament before God and live together as a married couple. She seemed excited about the idea, but said she needed more time to make such a commitment. We agreed on 6 months until her decision. In the meantime, our intimacy continued to grow, and so did the gossip about our frequent visits. Anne began receiving threatening letters, saying that she would face the wrath of God in this life and beyond, or possibly hang in the town square. Her family urged her to stay away from me. At first, Anne did not pay them any heed, but I watched as her anxiety mounted. During a particularly tearful episode, Anne confessed that her best friend's husband, Reverend Ainsworth, pressed her to have sex with him while his wife lay terminally ill. When she died, Anne struggled to reconcile her guilt and shame. Reverend Ainsworth immediately proposed marriage, and her family pressured her to accept. I watched as her anxiety mounted. But I had to try to calm and support her, but I needed to steel my own inner turmoil. Would Anne be like all the other women who enjoyed my friendship and sex, but in the end would abandon me for a wealthy man? I told her she had to decide between me and Mr. Ainsworth, and that I would be easily reconciled either way. But of course, that was not the truth. The next 3.5 months were pure torture. Anne was plagued by indecision and unraveling at high speed. It saddened me so, as I felt completely powerless to help her, and it was taking its toll on me. We agreed that she should seek treatment and take respite at her uncle's in Scotland, and I, upon fulfilling my duties at Shibden, would journey alone to Europe and Copenhagen. When Anne Walker left for Scotland in February, I resolved not to communicate with her directly. When I received her communications, I kept my responses kind, judicious, and proper. I focused on the business at Shibden. And it wasn't until the following June that I embarked on my journey to Europe and Copenhagen. Over the next 10 months, I visited with people across Europe, finally landing in Copenhagen. I met up with friends in high rank, which ultimately led to my invitation to the Queen of Denmark's birthday ball. But despite my remarkable adventures, Anne Walker was never far from my thoughts. And in Copenhagen, I received a letter reiterating Anne's sentiment that I was the only person who could bring her happiness. I felt validated for the first time in my life. Not long after, I received word that my beloved aunt was gravely ill. The voyage on the winter sea was wretched, but I was rewarded to find my aunt in much better shape than anticipated. I was home not 2 days when I received a letter from Anne. and we agreed to meet 1 week later. She said in the meantime that she would count each day and hour. I warned my heart not to draw any conclusions. But the evening came, and we talked until 4 a.m. She repented having left me and longed to follow me to Copenhagen. She also refused to marry Reverend Ainsworth. She spoke of wanting to commit to me, but I remained wary, for Anne had not followed through with her treatment and might easily get into the old way. I had been through quite enough. I made clear my conditions for commitment: the exchanging of rings, the taking of the sacrament before God, and seeking treatment. Anne obliged, and her spirits had noticeably improved after a month's time. Our intimacy deepened further. Anne asked that we be subtle, so as to avoid public attention to us. And I asked her to find the inner strength to respect her own desires. Perhaps I ask too much of Anne, for I know it takes great courage. But I shall be devoted to her always. Today, on March 30th, we got married. The moment Anne and I took the sacrament together was the greatest moment of my life. To Anne and to God, I recite my most beloved prayer. With all my faults, God grant me still the virtue of sincerity. And though I walk through many a darksome shade of folly and remorse, let there be one light, the light of truth, to guide us right at last. Amen.
I have just come from a ceremony that bestowed upon me the greatest of honors. I, Matilda Jocelyn Gage, was adopted into the wolf clan of the Mohawk Nation. Coronian Hawe, that is the name given to me. She who holds the sky. It was a breathtaking ceremony, and unlike anything I had ever seen. And look at this beautiful beaded purse, handmade by my wolf clan sisters, and presented to me. Me! See the intricate beading work? Oh, You may be wondering how I, a white woman of European descent, was chosen for membership in the Mohawk clan. But not even my colleagues, Elizabeth Cady Stanton or Susan B. Anthony, hold such an honor. But I was raised by abolitionist parents in a home on the Underground Railway, and I saw the effects of unimaginable cruelty imposed on those who simply looked different. I can still see those frightened black men and women fleeing for their lives, sleeping in our damp cellar, parted even from their children. And so I am doing my best to right the wrongs being done to our Haudenosaunee neighbors, a tribe you may know as the Iroquois. I am working to save their land, their language, and to protect their women from our white men. And in return, I have access to a society where men and women live together under matriarchal rule. And as president of the New York Women's Suffrage Association, I write about my observances. Here is a story in the New York Evening Post. It is an article based on what I have learned from the Haudenosaunee about gender equity. Of course, integrating such new thoughts can be quite intimidating to those who hold dominion. One such vexatious example is of my friend Lavinia Goodell. She graduated from law school, but was denied entrance to the Bar Association. The Wisconsin Supreme Court judge who dismissed her case delivered some idiotic puffery that women were meant for finer things. And yet that same judge, he had no difficulty with Lavinia earning her tuition by working in a filthy shoe factory. I'm lucky. I am educated. I can read and write and think for myself and challenge the opinions of others. But to what advantage? To stay home and darn my husband's socks? My father was a doctor, and he made me his assistant as a way to further my education. I bandaged and sutured wounds, delivered babies under the most trying of circumstances, and assisted in surgeries. So, at the age of 17, feeling well prepared, I applied to medical school. A letter of rejection soon followed. Yet my cousin William, who still hadn't mastered his multiplication tables, let alone couldn't stand the sight of blood, was accepted to the same school in the same year. Up until then, I had directed my anger towards relieving the oppression of others. But that new sight was personal. However, I put my resentment in storage for a more opportune time, and then followed the path that so many other young women whose opportunities were similarly limited followed. I married. I became Mrs. Henry Hill Gage, wife of a shopkeeper, at the age of 18. And with that whispered I do. All of my property, money, my religious considerations, my body, and even my future children legally became the sole property of my husband. I entered into civil death, with no legal rights left to me, no protections whatsoever, except to those granted to me by my husband. Praise be, his inclinations were as benevolent and open-minded as my father's. But what if they weren't? How many times have we seen husbands squander the wealth that their wives have brought to a marriage? And how many times have our female friends stayed in loveless partnerships because in leaving they would lose their children? And how many times have I had to mend married women who came to me with broken bones, battered by their husbands? And yet my efforts at their future safety were casually dismissed by counsel. If the Haudenosaunee women can retain all that they bring to a marriage and leave with it, should the marriage fail, So should we. And if native children can be considered members of their mother's clan, then why cannot our children be shared equally by both parents? And if sexual violence can be punished so severely within tribal nations, then cannot our government adopt the same protections as a natural human right? Oh, we women have been isolated in the European American notions of hearth and home, and so have been ignorant to such rights. For generations, we women have believed that women everywhere must conform to the same code of conduct. But now that we have seen such rights, we are speaking out for change. We have seen it so, and we are hungry. We have seen it so, and we want change. Do we not? I have made many lasting friendships among the strong native women, and I believe there is mutual respect. But women will be women. And as I entered the ceremony today, I heard many of them snicker. I thought perhaps my hat was on crooked. But no. The reason for their humor lay in what was beneath the hat, and my gloves, and all of the finery. They were laughing at the grotesquely exaggerated silhouette created of my backside and my bosom, by the painful stays of my corset. And as I looked at these women in their loosely fitting tunics, I wondered, why am I so encumbered? No wonder they appear healthier and stronger. They are not confined by an unnaturally pinched waist. And therefore, if you will excuse me, it is time for emancipation. Emancipation from the painful stays and the purple bruises they make. Restricted, that's what we are, in mind, in body, opportunity. Think how much better we might bend and breathe, and how much more we might achieve if it were not for the silly restrictions of corsets and laces. So as of right now, I am abandoning my corset, and I invite you to do the same. I do not wish to be perceived by my distorted figure, and nor do I believe that that is how you see yourself. So, let us free ourselves, and not be shy. To hell with what my husband or anyone else thinks. This will be so much better. You know, I have never been able to determine how women's lack of equality came to be. But the power of men is ordained and sustained by those raised high on Sunday's pulpits. Oh, the lofty men of our church are interpreting Scripture to downplay the value and importance of women and to inflate the power of men. The church and the legal system like to call us the finer sex when it suits their purpose. And indeed we are when it comes to waging war. Too many of us have lost men and boys to a civil war that left so few whole. Yes, change was necessary, but bigotry is never solved by the bayonet. And we women, we would have found a better way. The Haudenosaunee women condemn war amongst their own. It is they who maintain harmony by choosing their male tribal chief, and they have the power to depose him if he neglects his tribal duties. Imagine the power to influence governance. And yet, we white women are not even allowed to vote. I realize that it is not looked upon favorably by all that I enjoy the company of native women, and I am well aware that my colleague Susan B. Anthony would prefer if I left the suffrage movement altogether. She finds my efforts too radical, especially my attacks on organized religion. She is fearful that suffrage will lose the support of many as a result. However, no train can successfully climb a hill unless the tracks are cleared of trees, and the misinterpretation of God's word is a very large tree. It is indeed a long fight. Attitudes must change, and it must begin with the men we sleep beside. How many times have I been asked by men why it is that I fight so hard for the ballot? And I wish to scream aloud, it is because I have been defrauded of my rightful inheritance as a human being. I was banned from medical school, accosted for speaking in public, and jailed for voting in a town election in which I worked, all because I am a woman. And yet, painfully, it is not even unanimous among women to fight for the vote. I hear that there are some that are fearful of their husbands' reactions, to which I say rubbish. And there are others who have become too complacent in their role as secondary citizens, a position of which I am both ashamed and infuriated. The task of broadening freedoms and reshaping men's attitudes towards women should not be a fearsome endeavor, but an enlightenment of shared purpose on life's journey. Ask my husband Henry. He has seen that the sharing of thoughts and liberties are beneficial to both men and women. So, my dear friend, this is a fight worth having. I am certain that things can be better for us, our daughters, our granddaughters. I know, because I have seen it so.
You are shocked, sir. You refuse to take my photograph? Because of this? Or this? I'm sure you expected me to be fully assimilated into the white American culture. Otherwise, how could I be among you, in your capital, working for your government, approved by your president, Theodore Roosevelt? You're perplexed and unwilling to do your job? Perhaps if I share some of my story, I may enlighten you. For this is how I wish to face the camera on this day, 1911, and for all the years to come. After I'm long dead, history will see me as I am, a native woman, who's traveled far from her ancestral homeland, far from the Dakota Territory. I'm a member of the Turtle Mountain Band of Chippewa. Do you know us? Do you know how we've suffered since the white man arrived in our land? May I give you a brief account? Not to elicit your pity, never that. But to further your understanding, your education, because it is true, this Indian question that I meet again and again, is that it is not the Indian who needs to be constantly educated up to the white man, but the white man needs to be educated to the Indian. So to further your education, not long after your arrival, one of the gifts you brought was the plague, smallpox. I'm sure you've heard this, but did you know that in our Chippewa camp, only 1 in 10 of us remained alive after that scourge? 1 in 10. Yet here I stand, born of a Chippewa mother and a French father. My mother, Marguerite Renville, my father, John Bottineau, a loving couple who struggled hard for their children. Yes, I am a métisse. Yes, I'm of mixed blood. I know many whites object to my parents' union, but please do not demean me with the term half-breed that I hear so often. I'm proud of my heritage. I'm proud of both my parents. Proud of father who's worked so hard for so long to fight for the first people, the Native American people. And I have joined him in his fight. This is why I am here. This is why I have come here and taken this job and come to Washington, D.C. to work in the Office of Indian Affairs. I'd rather be home, but I'm here out of necessity. A matter of life and death is not too strong a term. I'm here to give my people a voice in your government, and by doing so, continuing the fight for our land and our way of life. All through the treaty era, my people have witnessed the inconsistent behavior of the United States government. We've been left with little or no land. We've been left poverty-stricken. Our trust in your government has dissipated. Can trust be restored? Is there a chance that we can work together? Is there any hope that the grave wrongs of the past will not be repeated? We each have our part to play. Yours starts there with a click of your camera and your willingness to see me and record me as I am, a Native woman, a survivor of the first people. Like you, I too marched for women's rights. In 1913, our cause was suffrage. Without the vote, we were silenced. Oh, what a parade. Inez Milholland on horseback wearing a flowing white cape led 9 bands, 4 mounted brigades, 3 heralds, 24 floats, and over 5,000 marchers. You need a parade like that. We took over Washington, D.C. on the eve of Wilson's inauguration. Oh, he was unhappy when he stepped off the train only to find a tiny crowd greeting him. "Where are all the people?" "Watching the march," they told him. "This is my suffrage dress." Amazing it still fits. Amazing it's still needed. You can still see the burn marks from the being pelted by lit cigars. I was not the only one spat upon and jeered at by the throngs of men on both sides. The men outnumbered us, and the police did a poor job of keeping them back. The next day, a headline read, "Mob hurts 300 suffragists at Capitol Parade." But the worst suffering was endured by the women who came before us. The women in jail, force-fed during their hunger strike for the vote. We marched with those women in solidarity. On that day in 1913, I remembered those women as I linked arms with my classmates from the Washington School of Law, the first law school for women. I became the first Indigenous woman to be admitted. But I attended nights since I had to keep my job at the Office of Indian Affairs. Still, I graduated in 2 years instead of 3. That's not a boast, it's just an acknowledgement of my advanced age. I was 51 when I became an attorney, and I continued to fight for Native American and women's rights. Finally, when the 19th Amendment was passed in 1920, our class planned a reunion to celebrate. But I did not have the heart to celebrate. The amendment granted women who were citizens the right to vote, and Native Americans were not considered citizens. Even after Congress passed the Indian Citizenship Act in 1924, whites used tactics to intimidate Native Americans to prevent us from voting, much like the tactics used against our African brothers and sisters in the South. States refused to put polling places near reservations or tribal communities. We were required to pass literacy tests or pay poll taxes. Our race still meant that we were treated less than full citizens. It wasn't until 1960s that Native Americans were granted the right to vote in every state. In 1962, Utah became the last state to ratify the Voting Rights Act. I did not live to see it, but I would have celebrated wholeheartedly the passing of that bill. Signed by President Johnson, it finally gave Indigenous people the right to vote. But tragically, in 2013, the Voting Rights Act was gutted by the Supreme Court, opening the door for many states to pass new laws that served as barriers to voting. The result? In 2020, roughly 1 million Native American are not registered to vote. When every roadblock and every hurdle that stands to suppress the vote is eradicated on that day, I will celebrate in earnest. Your march gives me hope. Let's not wait another 100 years for victory. Let's stand on the shoulders of our brave ancestors. Let's continue to rise up.